The winter of 975 comes down on Iceland like a door closing. On a farm below the hills, a man walks the length of his byre in the dark, a fish oil lamp in one hand. He is not checking his animals. He is checking the hay racks above them. They're emptying faster than the winter is. He does the sum in his head, the same sum every farmer in the country is doing that night, and the sum does not come out. What follows that winter, the old books record in a handful of lines. It was the severest famine Iceland ever knew in its heathen age. The record says, men ate ravens, foxes, things that should never be eaten, and it says the old and the helpless were given to the cliffs. The winter took the blame. It always does. But it was not the winter that emptied those farms, friend. It was a myth. The myth says the North lived on meat and raiding, that a Viking was fed by his sword and his roast. The cold was never the enemy. What the world forgot about how they actually ate was, there is a food system under the Viking Age, 5 working parts and 1 decision, and I will walk you through every piece the way it was actually done. Every piece except one. There is one step the legend buried hardest, and it is the step that explains the ravens and the cliffs. We will get there. Stay with me by choice, friend. This is worth the 25 minutes. My name is Stan Eriksson. I was raised on a northern coast by my grandfather, a fisherman and boat carpenter who kept the old ways and did not trust me to remember them. Before he died, he made me write them into a canvas-bound logbook. I have spent the years since reading the archaeology to check him against the record. He keeps coming up right. Here's the thing. This is not trivia about dead farmers. It is the actual answer to a question you think you know. How does a household on the edge of the habitable world eat for 6 months with no harvest coming? Could you do it? Could you look at your stores in August and know, to the animal, whether your family sees April? They did that sum every year for centuries, and the knowledge did not fade because it stopped working. It faded because the men who wrote the histories were the monks the raiders robbed, and nobody on earth writes an annal about a full hay barn. Before we get into it, put your mark on subscribe. Not for me, because the buried knowledge we drag back into daylight here, you will want the next one. There are 6 pieces to this. 6 in order. Miss one, you lose the herd. Miss the last one, you lose the household. You have heard rough versions of the first 5. Hay, barns, dairy, the autumn slaughter, hardy sheep. The 6th is the one the warrior legend stripped out, and it is the one being done in that dark byre in 975. Too late. So the real question is not what the Norse ate, friend. It is why we were taught the sword fed them when the scythe did, and how you take the truth back. Piece 1, the grass, a lowland meadow in high summer, the one stretch of the northern year when things grow. Whole households in the field, men, women, children, slaves, cutting grass with sickles and knives, turning it to dry, raking it, stacking it, covering the stacks with turf against the rain. Nobody is eating this crop, and this crop decides everything. Here is the inversion the legend hides. The stated wealth of the North was the raid. The actual wealth was grass. Norse society was organized around agriculture. The scholarship is blunt that loot and pillage could never have sustained it. And on the Atlantic edge, in Iceland and Greenland, the archaeology shows farms were sited by one factor above all: pasture. Thomas McGovern's work on the Norse North Atlantic reads the big byres and hay barns plainly. Grass determined where the Norse could live at all. The hay harvest was vital for one reason. Every mouthful of winter milk, every animal alive in spring, was summer grass, stored. A Viking farm was a machine for converting a short green season into a long, dark one, and hay was the fuel. Cut it dry, stack it tight, turf on top, grass feeds, the botch is water. Haystack damp does not keep, it spoils, and a spoiled stack in October is animals dead by February. The homework is only an observation this week. Next time you pass a hay field or a barn, look at it properly. You are looking at the actual engine of the Viking Age, but grass in a stack feeds nothing yet. It has to pass through an animal, and in the north, the animal has to survive long enough to be worth feeding. Piece 2. The Byre, a village at Bjerred in western Skåne, the 9th century. One house, 21 meters long, 6.5 wide, about 136 square meters of floor. A family of perhaps 7 to 10 people lives here, and behind a partition, under the same roof, so do the animals. The smell is constant. So is the warmth. That is the trade. The method is confinement. Northern winters kill cattle in the open, so the milk cows came inside, into the byre, and lived there for the dark months, fed by hand from the stored hay. These were not the cattle you know. Viking-age cattle stood under 120 centimeters at the shoulder, small animals bred for a hard country. Hardier stock could stay out and forage. The record is equally clear about the alternative. In the harsh winters, animals left outside starved to death. So the farm became an ark. People at the hearth end, beasts at the other, one roof holding the whole year's wealth through the night of the year. I will give you my own botch here, because this piece is where I earned it. I once stacked hay before it had fully dried, with rain coming and no patience. The stack heated, went gray with mold at the core, and the animals it was meant for would not touch it. It cost me a season's pride and a bought replacement. It taught me what a Norse farmer knew in his hands. The byre is only as good as what you carry into it. Bring them in. Feed by hand. One roof, one warmth. Roof holds. That is not folklore. The Bjerred house is documented by the Swedish History Museum, post holes, byre partition and all, and reconstructed longhouses across Scandinavia carry the same plan. The vindication is in the floor itself. Half of a Viking home was built for animals, and nobody builds half a house for livestock. They do not depend on utterly. So the herd survives. Now comes the question the roast meat legend cannot answer. If they were not eating the animals, what were the animals for? Piece 3. The milk. Morning in the byre, midwinter, Iceland. A woman milks by lamplight into a wooden pail. That pail, not a raiding chest, is the household treasury. Because the herd was not a meat locker, friend. It was a dairy engine, and the record says it straight. Cheeses, butter, buttermilk, and whey were valued more highly than meat. The method you have heard me lay out before, so I will keep the numbers tight. Milk was cultured into skyr, an acid-set fresh cheese that took 3 to 4 times more milk than yogurt takes. A whole summer of milking packed into tubs. And kept cool, it held protein for 6 months or longer. The sour whey went into barrels, and meat and butter were sunk into that acid and stored for months more. Surmatur, they called the result. Sour food. A cow you kill feeds you once. A cow you milk, and a culture you keep alive feeds you all winter and again next year. The logbook has a line on this in the old man's hand. Meat is a day, milk is a season, milk the dark months, culture the pale, barrel the whey, milk carries, and the proof is an unbroken chain, not a reconstruction. Skyr production never stopped in Iceland. The heritage cultures used today descend batch to batch from strains 1,000 years old. And MS Iceland Dairies, the country's largest producer, describes it plainly as how protein was kept for half a year. That is a living industry confirming what a Norse dairywoman knew by feel. The botch is losing the living culture, and the homework stands from before. Pasteurized milk, a spoonful of live starter, kept warm overnight. Make the old refrigerator with your own hands once. Pattern break, friend. Everything so far, a saga-age child knew before their 10th winter. What comes next is the piece that looks like savagery from the outside, and was arithmetic all along. Piece 4. The blood autumn. The animals come down from the summer pastures, and the farm becomes a place of slaughter. Blood on the frost. Meat boiling in every pot. A feast that binds the neighborhood together before the isolation closes in. The Christian chroniclers saw heathen excess in scenes like this. Look closer. The method is selection. Young bulls were bred and then killed before winter. The record is specific that they were slaughtered before they could consume large amounts of fodder. The old, the weak, the surplus, culled in autumn, eaten and preserved, precisely so the milk cows and breeding stock could eat their share of a finite stack of hay until spring. The feast was real, and the community was real. But underneath the ritual, the autumn slaughter was fodder mathematics wearing a holy face. Every animal standing in the byre in November was a mouth the hay had to carry for half a year. Every animal that could not justify that hay had to become food while it still had flesh worth taking. Count the mouths, cull the surplus, feast together, blood pays. The vindication sits in the bone middens archaeologists dig on Norse farm sites. The slaughter patterns are there to read. Young male cattle gone before their first full winter. Exactly as the fodder logic demands. The botch is sentiment. Keep an animal your hay cannot carry because it is fine stock, or because killing feels like loss, and you have not saved it. You have sentenced a different animal, or a person, in March. The homework is small. This week, look at where your own winter reserve sits, whatever form it takes for you, money or food or fuel, and ask the autumn question honestly. What am I carrying that my stack cannot feed? Yet some animals never came into the byre at all, and the ones that stayed outside tell you how fine the margin really was. Piece 5. The snow. A hillside in an Icelandic winter. Shapes half buried in the drifts. Wethers, castrated rams, fat and heavy fleeced, left out to fend for themselves while the cows eat the precious hay indoors. In the hard spells, later Icelandic tradition says, these animals dug themselves down into the insulating snow until only their nostrils broke the surface, and lived. The method is triage. The farm ran 2 herds on 2 budgets. Indoors, the dairy animals, expensive, hay-fed, irreplaceable. Outdoors, the hardy wethers and barren stock, grazing what they could find under the snow, costing the stack nothing. Wool and meat on the hoof. Banked on the hillside, the system stretched a finite hay supply across a maximum of animals by making the toughest ones pay their own way. And the measure of how much this mattered comes from Iceland's own government. After one of the country's worst famines, the governor Olafur Stevenson, who held the office from 1790 to 1806, called winter grazing the main pillar of our farming. That is a state official, 8 centuries after the settlement, still naming the Viking-age method as the thing the nation stood on. Hardy stock outside, deer stock inside. Let the snow do the sheltering. Snow shelters. The botch is a winter so hard, the outdoor budget fails. Ice over the grazing, drifts too deep even for the diggers. And suddenly the hillside bank is gone, and everything depends on the stack indoors. Which brings us to the edge of it, friend. because now you can see the whole machine. Grass, byre, milk, cull, snow, 5 working parts. The farmers of 975 had every one of them. They were not fools, not brutes, not men waiting for a raiding season to feed them. They were running the finest cold climate food system in Europe, and they had run it for 100 years on that island. And still that winter ends with ravens eaten and elders at the cliffs, because there is a 6th piece, and I promised you at the start we would get here. Piece 6, the count. Go back to that buyer in the dark, the man with the lamp looking up at the racks. Understand what you are actually seeing. He is not discovering a problem. He is rereading an answer he was given months ago. The lamplight on the empty racks is only the receipt. Here is where it turns. The decision that ruled a Norse winter was not made in winter. It was made at the start of autumn in daylight, when the household set 2 numbers against each other, the animals standing in the yard and the hay lying in the stacks. And the record says it plainly. The stock was compared to the stored hay, and if the hay fell short, the weakest animals were slaughtered until the 2 numbers matched. That was the whole secret. Not endurance, not toughness. A count. Winter never killed a farm that counted right, because winter can only collect what August already owes it. The famine of 975 to 76 was the year the count had no good answer. The grass itself had failed across the island. The stacks were thin everywhere at once, and no cull could balance numbers that low. The old books do not record why the grass failed that year. They record what an unbalanced ledger looks like when it comes due in a place with no neighbor to buy from and no ship coming. Ravens, foxes, the cliffs. The winter of 975 did not do that. The summer of 975 did, and Iceland's record keeps the pattern. Another year of dearth in 1057 and 58, a great famine in 1118, and an annal from 1341 counting 80 head of cattle dead on one church estate between late May and the 1st of August, after Hekla buried the grazing in ash. Different centuries, same ledger, grass feeds, roof holds, milk carries, blood pays, snow shelters. The count decides. That is not a moral failing in those farmers, friend. They did the sum honestly, and the sum failed them. A whole island can do everything right and still draw the year the grass does not come. But luck is not a method. Knowing is. And nobody hid this from you. Not a conspiracy, friend. Just how memory works. The raid made a story, and the ledger made a living, and only one of those gets written down by the men who were robbed. There was never any glory in remembering that the North ran on grass and milk and a count done right. One failed summer. The worst famine of the heathen age. Say the whole method once, end to end. Cut the grass dry and stack it under turf, because hay is the year's real harvest. Bring the dear animals under the roof and feed them by hand through the dark. Milk them daily and turn the pail into skyr and sour barrels that carry 6 months. In autumn, count the mouths against the stacks and cull until the numbers agree, and feast together on the difference. Leave the hardy stock to the hillside and let the snow itself shelter them. And before any of it, do the count honestly in daylight, while there is still time to act on the answer. This was never really about hay, friend. It was about being people who ran the arithmetic of survival themselves, nobody's ledger but their own. That is the capability on offer, not a costume, a habit of counting what you have against what the dark months will ask. You do not have to run a farm to take it. Do one thing. The Saturday, do your own autumn count. pantry, fuel, money, whichever stack your winter draws on, and make the two numbers look at each other. And tell me down below, did your family keep a version of this? A slaughter month, a preserving week, a rule about what got stored before the cold. Different coasts did this different ways, and the story with the most comments is the story I go deep on next. Somebody's ancestors fed a household through a famine winter because they counted right in August. Now you know how. Do not let it die on your watch. Next time, how Norse crews carried 5-year protein across open ocean with no salt at all, and how the salt trade made sure the world forgot it. Keep the old ways. They kept us.